Good afternoon and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we have Alexander Inchbald is back to join us on another mind-bending. God knows where we're going to go. We've brought the shovels. We're going deep. Yeah, I don't know. So, Alexander, thank you so much for coming on again. We pre-framed this conversation just before we started there with, I think I was getting to the point of saying, is the canvas of art, is that the same as our consciousness? And that's a question I'm going to put to you, Alexander, whenever you're ready.
That's a brilliant question. Thank you so much for welcoming me back, Pete. It's a genuine privilege to be here. There was I just sneaking a little snack in there because I know how long these conversations last, and I thought I'd sneak something in off air before we actually went live, and then we went live. So there we go. Is consciousness like a canvas? Well, consciousness is a label, isn't it? And consciousness means different things to different people. But here's how I've experienced it. So this is a canvas here. It's a painting I actually painted a few weeks ago. Here's another canvas. It's a painting I painted last year. And in this part of the world, in the Alps, we have the most spectacular autumns, like brilliant, beautiful autumns, incredible colors. Like you get trees going all the way up the mountain, kind of oranges and greens and yellows. And so I go out and paint, and it's the only time I paint in color. The rest of the year I paint in white, 4 shades of white. Anyway, every time I go out and paint, whether it be autumn or winter, I observe something very peculiar because I always paint outside. And what I observe is that, in fact, if you're really in a state of flow, the canvas does not end at the end of the canvas. The canvas actually extends. In fact, the whole world is a blank canvas. And we can create on that whatever we choose to create. The problem is that most of the time, what we're creating is what we already know. Like we're stuck in our head. And so what we end up creating is what we've known from the past. And we just keep on repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating. It's kind of like Groundhog Day. So we think Groundhog Day is a film starring Bill Murray. Actually, it's the reality of our lives most of the time. And what we find it really, really difficult to do is to get out of our heads and realize that, in fact, we're running the same program again and again and again and again and again. So we keep on creating the same canvas or the same reality, and we're stuck within this canvas. Whereas actually, the whole thing's a canvas. We can create whatever we want. Now, is the canvas, like all of this, consciousness? Well, that's a label. Like the word canvas is a label, but I think the word canvas is a slightly more neutral label than the word consciousness. So as soon as you use the word consciousness, some people go, yeah, I get that, I understand that. And other people will go, what is that, a religion? Are you talking spirituality? Are you one of these weird woo-woo guys? And so at that point, we might lose people. Now, different cultures will describe it as consciousness. Different wisdom cultures would say, yes, absolutely. What you're describing, this thing is consciousness, and you can create on consciousness, or you can use consciousness, the formless, to create whatever you want. Other people say, no, that's a bit too weird. We need a bit more science in this. And so you may use another term. There's a guy called Albert Einstein who lived a couple of hours north of here. I talked about him last time. And he actually came up with the equation, that famous equation equals mc squared, while on a tram in Bern. And he would use the term unified field. So there's a unified field. There's something which is not substance, it's not form, it's formless. There was another guy called Carl Gustav Jung, who was a Swiss psychologist who lives about 3 hours north of here, in a place called Zurich. And he used the term collective unconscious. And then there were the original Buddhists who used the term the records of Akasha, but they didn't live anywhere near here. They lived in India somewhere, like a few thousand miles away. And then there will be mediums who might call it the astral plane. And I don't understand necessarily all the nuances between these different things. To me, they're just different labels. And frankly, the labels are not what's important. What's important is the experience. Have you had an experience where you've been in total flow, where something magical, mystical, synchronous, weird has happened? You've gone, how the hell did that happen? That's what I'm interested in. And then we try and describe it, as we talked about last time. The words that we use to describe it then end up being confusing and misleading because everyone has a different interpretation of those labels. So that's a long way of answering a very, very simple question. Yes and no is the answer. Yes, if you use that term and you also use the other terms to ensure that everyone feels included, and no if it doesn't work for you and you want to use another term.
I love it. That could be unpacked 50 different ways, but
I know.
I'm curious for something you sort of said, in terms of experiencing total flow. Is a sort of a term you use there, and can that be linked to experiencing total flow? Would that in your world be linked to generation of masterpiece?
Yes. So what does total flow mean? Well, let's get a bit more scientific and then let's get a little bit more experiential. I think I talked last time about brainwaves, and we shift brainwaves all the time. When you fall asleep, you shift first of all into alpha brainwaves, which is kind of the link between the beta, which is conscious mind. You shift into alpha, and then into theta, which is light sleep, and delta, which is deep sleep, and then you kind of rotate between these three. And delta, I would say, delta and theta, like it's possible to get into theta, I believe, because you can do it in meditation, you can do it in hypnosis. Most of the time when we are in a state of flow, we're probably in gamma, which is actually the other side. So it's like, the highest brainwave that you can access is gamma. Very little research around it, but it appears that in gamma brainwaves, you're in a flow state and you're reconnected to this entire canvas again. And if you're connected to the entire canvas, the entire ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, an entire, and like you're connected to the energy and it's flowing through you. And does that therefore enable you to create your masterpiece? Well, yes, it does, because you are connected, and therefore whatever you are creating is a reflection of the system. Another way to put it would be to say that everything you create is a self-portrait. So this looks like it's a painting of a landscape, trees, the clouds, the mountains, or as the light's going a little bit. But you can basically see the outline of it. So that's a landscape showing not a portrait. Well, it's a self-portrait in the sense that in the moment of time in which I created it, there was a certain energy. I was in a certain state of mind. And it's not a perfect depiction of the landscape, but it is a perfect depiction of my state of mind when I created it. And so I would say that any painting, any art, in fact, anything you create is a self-portrait, because it is a reflection of your state of mind in that moment of time where you are creating. Now, not every painting, not every book, not every film ends up becoming a masterpiece. We forget many films, we forget many books. We remember Van Gogh's Sunflowers, we remember Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, we remember Jackson Pollock's strip paintings. Why do we remember those things and we don't remember other things? Well, I would say that in the moment of creating a masterpiece, you're connected to the entire canvas. And if you're connected to the entire canvas, then the self-portrait you are creating is of you connected to this. And because everyone else is connected to this, they can see themselves in it. They may not in that moment be fully connected to it, but you are providing a doorway into it, a visual access, a visual entry point into this. And so that resonates at a very, very, very deep level. Or, I mean, it doesn't have to be a painting, it could also be a book. I mean, we've all read books and we've been moved to tears, or we've read it and we absolutely love the book, or we've seen a film and we're like, that's it. That's it. And I'm sure you've had podcasts as well, where the podcast has just been so unbelievably powerful. And you've had so many comments come back from people because they somehow feel connected to it, whatever you choose to call it. And that it was just a perfect conversation. So I think that's true, that in a state of flow, in fact, it becomes inevitable that you create a masterpiece. Why is it inevitable? Because if you're creating all the time, which you're constantly creating. You may not be consciously aware that you're consciously creating, but you are constantly creating. Then in the moment that you reconnect, you are creating something, even if it's just a thought or a series of phrases that you've connected together, or email can be a masterpiece because the entire act of creation was in that state of flow. You were totally connected in that moment. So I would say yes is the answer to that question. Long answer to a short question. Because I'm giving long answers today. I'll see if I can give a short one.
How do you differentiate between a creation and a memory?
No chance of a short answer to this question.
You don't.
How do you differentiate between a creation and memory? That's a brilliant question. I think the difference for me would be that a creation is physical form, like it's physical. So you're bringing something from the metaphysical world, the world of the formless, the unified. Whereas a memory to me remains in the personal unconscious. Now you have to have experienced it, the memory. Well, not necessarily have to experience it, but the vast majority of your memories you have experienced. So a memory is of something which has happened, normally in the past, and is now only exists in the formless. It's a thought, it's an idea, but it depends what the memory is of. I can have a memory of painting this painting, and I can say, well, that memory was about the act of creation, being in the act of creation. But it is a thought form in relationship to an action, whereas the creation is actually the process of bringing something, for me, and everyone would define it differently, but it's the process of bringing something from what I would call the inner game into the world of form, from the world inside us into the world outside us. And we're doing this constantly. Creation is a word. Literally, it's a word, but this process here, that word, I'm bringing a thought form into existence with my voice. That is the act of creation. Whereas a memory is then remembering I just said that. So it can be in relationship to something that was created. Normally it is, because it's to do with actions. But you could have a memory of a meditation. There's no actual kind of physical, there's nothing which is physically being brought into form in that memory.
I suppose then even a memory is a creation. Is that fair? Because you have to sort of redraw or re-extrude it to then be able to represent it, or is it? I don't know.
Well, you could say that. Again, it depends on your definition of what is a creation, and I think it's a really interesting. It's a fascinating question. What is a memory? What is a thought? what is the impulse behind a thought? So to me, the impulse comes first. You get a sense that something's coming through. And I think we talked about this a little bit last time. That impulse, which is really just energy, turns into a thought, and the thought turns into an action, or into a word, or into something. So it takes form. Where in that process has it moved from the formless into the form? So to me, the act of creation is moving something from the formless into form. That would be my definition. Now, other people I understand would question that and challenge that. It's just my definition of what creation is. You could define it a different way. You could say that the act of creation is actually from the impulse to the thought. You could say that's the act of creation. So the thought, then, according to that definition, you can remember a thought, and therefore the memory is the same as creation. I think I'm defining creation as slightly broader than that it goes beyond the thought and it comes into reality in the form of a word, in the form of a physical form of action. And I'm not definitive on that. I'm open to both definitions, but I think that's an easier one. And to me, the journey of creation goes through those two steps, and often it's between the first and the second step that we end up polluting most of the time the impulse into the thought. And the consequence of that pollution is that then from the thought into the action, that's where it's actually too late, and that's where you create the unintended ripples.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I suppose it's trying to get the head around in terms of. So it's, well, for me to get my head around, I'm trying to understand you take someone maybe that they're trying to replicate a masterpiece, or you replicate a painting by some artist, but even a replication is creation in itself, because it is unique. Everything is unique.
Correct.
So
Correct.
it is a creation. It just happens to look very like something else.
Yeah, it is a creation. It's not a masterpiece, because the act of copying something, the act of replicating something, triggers a very different part of the brain, and therefore it has a different energy behind it.
Okay, that painting behind you, then,
Yeah,
that place exists, I assume, does it?
it exists.
Would you call it a masterpiece?
No, I'd allow somebody else to do that if they see that. I mean, take Van Gogh's sunflowers, right? Van Gogh's sunflowers sit in the yellow house in Arles for years, gathering dust, and then he has to leave Arles, and he goes back to near Paris, which is where he dies, and he takes all his paintings with him, and they're just wrapped up, painted. Nobody looked at it. In fact, he's painted like 60 paintings in 60 days. Nobody's saying they're a masterpiece. Not a single person is saying they're a masterpiece. In his lifetime, he sells 2 paintings. That's it. It's only when he dies, and then his brother dies, Theo dies 6 months later, and then his brother's wife starts to promote these paintings because she has no money to pay for the child. But even then, nobody's saying they're a masterpiece. She's just promoting these paintings. It's not until Victor Hugo looks at the paintings and goes, "This is what I'm talking about in terms of art. This really unleashing the human spirit, like the true creativity. That's real art." So Victor Hugo is the first person to say, he doesn't say this is a masterpiece, but he's the first person to acknowledge this is a great painting. And the consequence of Victor Hugo, this amazing writer, who's quite famous, saying this is a great painting, is then other people go, oh, I get it. It's a great painting. So, so to answer your question, which I know was not really where you were going with your question, is that a masterpiece? No, I'm not going to say it's a masterpiece. That's pure arrogance. Could I say that in the moment of creation that there was no pollution? I know the state I was in while I created it was a pretty pure state. It's a pretty beautiful state. But if I then look at the painting, I know it's getting darker, so it's harder to see now. But if I then look at the painting, there are parts of the painting that I can go, that's not totally in harmony. So on that note, and while you ask your next question, I'm going to go and turn the light on so at least you can see the painting just a little bit more. You're on mute, mate.
That would help. To unpack the question, I suppose, that is a copy of what you saw. And maybe I'm being pedantic per se.
No, it's not a copy of what I saw, but I get where you're going.
Yeah, if you can unpack it better than me, because I can't unpack it.
Yeah. So no, it's not a copy of what I saw. I mean, let's be honest, right? I'm going to go and grab the painting, right? So you can see what I'm talking about, because I think this is really important.
Please don't damage it, because I feel forever guilty.
No. Don't worry about it. Right. So here's the painting, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Beautiful.
So, thank you. Have you ever seen a landscape exactly like that?
No.
No, you haven't. Right? You've never seen a landscape exactly like that. I could take you to the spot where I painted it, but it doesn't look exactly like this.
Have you ever seen a landscape that looks exactly like that?
No. So is it a copy of the landscape?
No.
No. Right? So what is different between a painting, which is a copy of a landscape, and this painting? What's the difference?
Filtration, imagination, purity of thought.
Yeah. So you call it filtration. I would call it interpretation.
Sure.
So the role of the artist is to interpret the energy, which happens to be in the visual form in terms of a landscape, through them in such a way that they can then sign the bottom of it. Like, you've never seen a landscape like that. I've never seen a landscape like that, but that's the landscape that appears on the canvas. So it's not a copy. It's an original painting by Alexander Inchbald. Now, what's the purpose of the painting then? Is it to replicate the landscape? No, if it's to replicate the landscape, you'd pay $1,000 or whatever, $200, get on a plane, fly over here, I'd take you to the spot, you go and experience the spot, you take a photo and you go home. You wouldn't buy the painting for whatever I'm going to charge for the painting, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, right? You wouldn't do that. You'd just jump on a plane if that was what you really wanted. So what then is the purpose of a painting? Which is really, I guess, possibly where you're going with the question. Well, it's not then about what it visually looks like. It can't be.
Is that then a recreation of your imagination?
No, it's just energy.
Is imagination not energy?
Yeah, it's a different way of it could be a different way of describing that. But the reason that somebody buys a painting isn't because they want a copy of a landscape on their wall. And whether they describe it this way or not, it's because that makes them feel a certain way. And if it makes them feel a certain way, then it actually doesn't have anything to do with what it looks like. It's to do with what it feels like. And if it's to do with what it feels like, then we're talking about the energy with which the painting was created, not what was put on the painting.
I think that's what struck me the last time. Is so profound, is if there is the right word, and you took us through that story very kindly of being, you were up on the mountain, you were painting Mont Blanc, snow, painting becomes unpainted.
Yeah.
And you sign what could be perceived from another point of view as a blank canvas. But my takeaway was actually the journey, that canvas that had actually all been on, is so incredibly significant. That's what sat with me the last time. So you're painting the feeling, you're painting the journey. If you were to buy that canvas, as you say, that sort of makes sense to me, what you've just said, in terms of, that you're buying the feeling. Well, same with what could look like a blank canvas, is kind of going, no, it's everything and nothing at the same time.
And isn't that what every artist has done since time immemorial? Like, so if you go back to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, right? There you got a picture of this old man, God, on a cloud, and he's reaching out his finger to Adam. Now, it looks like a man. In fact, it looks like two men. But have you ever seen a man sitting on a cloud reach down to a man sitting on land?
No.
No. So he's not copying anything. There's nothing that he's replicated there. He's creating something entirely new. Now, he happens to be inspired by Genesis chapter 1, verse 4, I think it is, or somewhere around 16, I can't remember, but it's in chapter 1, and it's God created man in his own image. So he's inspired by this. But what's important here is not the fact that he is depicted Adam as this incredibly kind of handsome, almost godlike figure, nor that he's depicted God beautifully and the angels in the cloud around beautifully. That's not what's important. What's really important there is, how does that make you feel when you look up that ceiling and go, oh my God, how did he do that? This is awe-inspiring. So you can say, well, it's a perfect depiction of a human figure and a perfect depiction of a godlike figure, but that misses the point. The point is, in that moment when you stand there and you look up, you're inspired. You have a feeling. Fast forward to the Impressionists. Take Monet, right? So take his water lilies, like his biggest water lilies. I mean, they're longer than this room. Okay, and you stand there, this vast canvas, and it just swallows you up. And you stand there and you look at it. Does it look like water lilies? No. When you stand this close to it, like this close, no, it doesn't look like water lilies. It looks like a few brushstrokes on the canvas. When you go right back, like this far away from the canvas, you look at it and you go, oh my God, it's water lilies. But in the brushstrokes, there's total mystery. So what was the point of that? Well, again, I would say it's not about what it looks like, it's what it feels like.
Can you, I don't know if it's possible, as an artist, or as an appreciation of an artist or a painting, I mean, can you judge where someone's focal length, or their imagination length, if you like, is based on their work?
What do you mean by their focal length? Can you help me to unbundle that one?
Yeah, what do I mean by it? I think even as you were describing, if I can, the way you were describing that painting is saying up close, it's It wasn't
Yeah.
clear. In fact,
Yeah.
it was out of focus, and as you say, it was just kind of
Yeah.
looking like random brushstrokes. At the right length, it is all immersive.
Yeah.
You go further back, and then it has less impact because I don't know, you've maybe your peripheral vision comes into play more, so the proportions are wrong. So what's my point? I'm just curious about.
It's a great implicit question. I mean, you can try and articulate if you want to. I think I know where you're going with it.
Please, if you know, then you know more than I do.
Yeah. So let me share this with you, right? So what is the average brush length, right? This is a pencil. Okay, this would be a pretty short brush, right?
Hmm.
So let's say the average brush, I mean, the brushes I use, let's say they're double the length, which is not entirely true. They're not that long, but let's say they're about this long, right? Now that is the average brush length. So imagine I'm holding this as a paintbrush, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've now got my canvas here, right? And like if I now stretch back, like that's as far as I'm going to be from the canvas. And most of the time I'm like this. So this is the distance from the canvas. Now, what I've just described, as you correctly picked up on, is that actually the canvas doesn't make sense from that distance. It doesn't. I mean, let me take the canvas, let me take this canvas, right? So this canvas, right? If I hold this really, really close to the screen,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Correct, right? And if I hold it back here, it starts to make sense, right? Not completely, but it starts to make sense. You get the idea of what that canvas is about, like the mountains and trees.
Yeah.
It may not be
Absolutely.
the perfect depiction, but it makes sense. But when I hold it here, it doesn't make sense. Now, I'm actually holding that at the distance that I just described,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is basically what's happening with every single canvas which has ever been painted. Now, if you go back to, let's say, realism, right? So you go back to Constable, you go back to Turner. Turner was the first person who started to break down the kind of the perfect depiction, let's say, of a landscape. So let's say you go back to Constable, who was really depicting reality, or Courbet, he was depicting reality. When you're that far away from the canvas, you can depict reality. I have to tell you, it's pretty hard to do, to depict reality, right? Because you're every single brushstroke actually hiding the brushstroke. The brushstroke is hidden. So you look at Vermeer's paintings, which are only about this size. The brushstroke's actually hidden. Very, very difficult to do. Very, very fine. Like it's almost like you can't even see the signature of the artist there. So the signature of the artist, the interpretation is coming through in a different way. If you then look at a painting like this, or the Impressionists, or Van Gogh, or beyond that, and you start to look at someone like Jackson Pollock, the drip painter, what you're then looking at is the breakdown of the brushstroke. So your question is now valid. Where's the focal length? Actually, even though it's hard to paint a Vermeer, in a sense, it's easier because you know what you're searching for. You're searching for perfection. When you're painting like this, theoretically, as you imply with your question, it's harder. Why is it harder? Because, well, you have to keep on running backwards and forwards. Like if you were to think of it logically, from a logical Newtonian perspective, you would be here at one moment, and then the next moment you'd walk back 10 meters and you'd look to see whether it's working. And that's what I used to do. I used to do that all the time. Here's what I realized: it doesn't work. Because what you're actually doing is you're going from the inner game, which I talked about last time, so the essence, the spirit, the creative kind of core, and you're going into the outer game. You're analyzing, using your head, what the painting looks like. And as soon as you do that, you break flow. You're literally changing brainwaves. You're going from maybe gamma or possibly theta brainwaves, and you're going out into beta brainwaves, and then back, and then it's almost impossible to do because you're constantly changing state. So in fact, you stay this length all the time. So how then does the canvas emerge? Well, you can't do it based on a conscious, intentional, analytic process. You can only do it based on an unconscious, intuitive process. And I would say that Jackson Pollock perhaps described it best. He said, and these aren't exactly his words, but close enough to get the gist. He said, you need to stay connected to the painting at all times. And originally I thought, well, what does he mean connect? I mean, here he is with like literally tubs of paint, right? Like big tubs of paint. And he's literally got a stick and he's dipping the stick in and he's flicking the paint at the canvas. Right? How do you stay connected to the painting? It's not, again, a physical thing. It's not like he's got a foot on the canvas all the time and he can't go to the bathroom. What it means is that he is staying mentally connected to the painting at all times. So even if you take a break, your mind remains connected to the canvas. And if you can do that throughout the creation of a canvas, you'll create a masterpiece. So what Jackson Pollock used to do is used to start about 10 o'clock in the evening and paint through to 6 a.m. in the morning. A couple of reasons for that. One reason is total flow, like it's a period of time when you're not really going to be disturbed. Second reason is that natural circadian rhythm of the body, it's naturally, as I talked about earlier, it's going to go into theta and delta brainwaves naturally, so you're accessing this more creative space where the conscious mind is less active. And so that's what he used to do. And I do the same. I'll go and paint during the day. Slightly harder to do it during the day, but it's still possible to get into that space, and you can be there for 6 to 8 hours. And that's exactly what I do. Now, when it comes to a book, which, as you know, is what I'm just about to launch, that's a totally different approach because you can't just write a book in one go. I mean, some people have. They've literally recorded the book and then they've got the book narrated, but there isn't the flow becomes overwhelming. There's no logical structure to it. So with a book, you have to go back into states of flow and out and back and out. And that's why actually writing a book is a really difficult thing to do, because when you create a painting, you're in that state for that period of time, literally like this, and your level of your energy doesn't really change for that long. So you're literally there and you're painting for 6 to 8 hours. But when you write a book, you come away from it, you step away, you go and do something else, you go and have lunch, dinner, write your emails, whatever, and you come back to it the next day and you have to get back into that state. But you are a different person. As Herodotus said, no man steps into the same river twice. The river is different and so is the man. That's why creating anything that takes longer than a day is actually a really, really difficult thing to do for it to become a masterpiece. And when you then consider that Michelangelo took 4 years to create the Sistine Chapel and 4 years to create his first masterpiece, which was David, the statue of the little shepherd boy who killed Goliath, you realize what an incredible, incredible feat that is. Easier to go and paint on a mountain for 6 hours than it is to spend 4 years. Way, 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 way easier. But the same principle is true. You're staying connected to the painting at all times. So he is mentally connected to that creation for 4 years.
That, as you say, is quite astounding, really, when you think about it.
We can't stay connected to one thing for 4 minutes, Pete.
I thought it was just me. That was all right.
No, mate, it's all of us. It's all of us.
What's the... Can you paint from your imagination?
Sure, of course you can. You know, that's what Pollock's doing. Like, there's nothing, you know, if you look at his drip paintings, there's nothing figurative. You can't tell. I mean, you could try and make patterns out of it, but they're literally all coming straight out of the unconscious, what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. So is that imagination? Is the imagination another word for the collective unconscious, or is collective unconscious another word for the imagination, or is the imagination somehow located somewhere else? I think there is a distinction between the two. I don't think they're the same thing. And now you're going to ask me, what do I think the difference is? Well, you can, and I'll attempt to give you an answer where you can avoid that one, because I think it may get a bit technical. Yeah, I mean, many painters have done that. There are painters who do figurative paintings entirely from their imagination. And what role does imagination play? Is imagination interpretation? There you need to use your imagination, perhaps.
Because I was curious in terms of, from a masterpiece perspective, whether, creating a vision, I suppose, when I look at it from a coaching perspective, if you like, creating a vision through experience, it's like, well, what do you want? Well, I want 10 more of what I had before, and bigger, better, quicker, faster, whatever. Okay, that's tangible, right? It's just more of that, and just put it over there and we're all done. Whereas creating your vision from an imagination is kind of going, I want something I've never had before. I want something that's, I almost can't perceive it. It's that different methods of, I suppose what I'm trying to get is my small brain around it, kind of going, if you create it from the imagination, is that going to remove the sort of restrictions or limitations of normal everyday thinking and allow you to get into a flow state that is more closer to your flow state, which could create your masterpiece?
Well, let's go into the faster, quicker, like first, because that's relatively easy to describe, right? And then let's try and distinguish that from what you're describing. So faster, quicker, taller, better, those are all outer game attributes. And there's a distinction here, and I touched on this earlier, that when you are in the act of creation, the act of creation is very different from the act of recreation. In fact, the brain lights up differently. And it's an interesting question, because you can't take an artist, right, and put him in an MRI scanner. Like, here I am in my MRI scanner, right? There's not enough room. If you've ever been in an MRI scanner, it's actually quite claustrophobic. Like, it's here. It's like this. So you can't go in with your paintbrush, and you can't even create a Vermeer in there. Like, you can't do anything. So you can't lift your hands, you can't do anything. And you have to keep your head perfectly still. It's in this little thing, and it's been held. Of course, now be asking a question. Why have you been in an MRI scanner? Well, I have been in an MRI scanner. Actually, they were checking whether there was something going on with my brain, like my sinuses were blocked. So I've had that experience, which is fantastic, because I know that it's impossible to create a painting, sculpture, to write any of that. So what they did is they took a wrapper. And a wrapper is interesting, because a wrapper will create a wrap from scratch, pure flow state, a new wrap. But a wrapper can also repeat a wrap they've already created. So you've got those two different states. And what they observed was what happened in the brain when you were creating and when you weren't creating. And they saw two things which were interesting. The first thing they saw was that the state of creation was a very different state from the state of recreation. So different parts of the brain lit up. And it's not as simple to say that the right hand side of the brain lit up when you were creating, and the left hand side lit up when you were repeating. That's just a media myth. Like, it's not true. It's pop psychology. It's poor pop psychology at that as well. So in fact, what happens is that when you create, both sides of the brain light up, and when you recreate, both sides of the brain light up, but different sides of the brain, different aspects of the brain. So you can see the difference, and it's different parts of the brain that are lighting up. But the really interesting finding which came out of this research, they weren't looking for this. was that, and I think I might have mentioned this last time, but what they discovered was that the impulse which led to the idea happened before anything lit up in the brain. So the words were already coming out of the mouth as the brain was lighting up. And that led them to conclude that there was some outside agency, their words, not mine, some outside agency which appeared to be creating in that moment. Call that consciousness, the blank canvas, the unified field, collective unconscious, whatever you label you want to put on it, fine by me. But I find that construct really, really interesting, that act of creation is different from recreation, and the creation act does not appear to be coming from the conscious mind. And that, of course, begs the question, where does it come from? How do you get into that state? How do you sustain that state? And I hope I've started some clues, at least how I do that. And it's not just how I do it, like looking at how other people have done it. I think there's something here. I'm not saying I've got it perfect, but it's the best explanation I've ever come across. And I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours studying the research, studying myself, and studying other artists to try and work out how true creation happens. I answered your question. I forgot it. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's sort of
Poor memory.
No, I mean, but that's the beauty of rabbit holing.
There's the difference between creation and recreation, or creation and memory. I forgot the question. Sorry.
No. It makes a lot of sense. And what's been the most creative way for you, or the most obviously you've worked with a lot of companies and you've been able to do that. How's this all come into play for you in terms of making it tangible for people and for companies and people like that?
Let's talk about individuals first, actually, because I think it's easier to talk about the individual than I'll talk about the collective. And you're right, I've worked with lots of companies, lots of individuals as well. There are really 4 components that I look at when I'm helping an individual. And the reason I talk with an individual is because a company is a collection of individuals. So if you talk about the individual, let's talk about the inner game and the outer game, as I talked about last time, and then the bridge between the two. So you've got the inner game, which is, if you remember, it's the doorway into the inner world. And the doorway itself is the sixth sense, your intuition, and the key to unlock it is your purpose. So what I help people to do is I help them to articulate their purpose, the essence of who they are. And I just did that today for 2 people, actually. One is in the States. She works for a healthcare company, and she joined me for a session where we're going to help as many people who turn up on this Thursday, to a session where we're going to actually do a purpose clinic. And I helped me in Japan to do it. And I've helped over 1,000 people now to articulate their purpose. Now, most people think about purpose as what they do. They think of it as an outer game thing. I talk about purpose as who you are and why you're here. So it's a really existential thing. And whenever I help somebody to do that, there is an enormous release of energy. You might be able to feel some of that energy right now as I talk about it. It's really powerful. It's a very powerful conversation. It's a privilege to be involved in it. And I've taken Simon Sinek's work, I've taken other leaders' work, and I've just built my own model and refined that model until I've got a process, a system, which takes about 45 minutes to help somebody to articulate their purpose. It's possible to do it in 20 minutes, but the point is, it's not about time, because actually this is outside of space and time, right? So you have an experience. So that's the first step. The second step is then to work out the outer game. So you've got the inner and the outer. And the outer game is helping you to understand your personality or identity. And there are many tests out there. You may have come across Myers-Briggs or DISC or Wealth Dynamics. I'm actually a master trainer for Wealth Dynamics, which is one of the leading entrepreneur systems in the world. And I created my own system as well, which was fully putting on Wealth Dynamics work. It's a simplification of Wealth Dynamics. It's called the Artist Profile. And all of us create in one of 4 different ways. We either create ideas, we create communities, we create value systems, or we create processes, systems and processes that enable things to scale. So heart, head, focused out into the world, focused inside into the organization. And all of these systems, whether it be Myers-Briggs, Artist Profile, DISC, are based on the same underlying model, and that underlying model was first described in terms of psychology by Carl Jung, and he based it in turn on something called the I Ching, which is a 5,000-year-old Chinese book called the Book of, in English, it's the Book of Changes. And what that looks at is the seasons. And if you look at all psychological literature, it basically follows the same patterns. It talks about archetypes and different archetypes being associated more with one season than the other, and everything going in cycles. And I looked at that and I thought, that's brilliant, but we are not our personality. We're not an archetype. We may embody one type of archetype for a period of time. We may embody that archetype for a lifetime, but we are not our personality. We're not our identity. And the reason I know that for myself is that I did Myers-Briggs when I joined Unilever when I was 25. And if you know anything about Myers-Briggs, it's 4 polarities: extrovert to introvert, sensing to feeling, thinking to judging, and there's one other. And when I did it, I was ESTJ. And I did it a few years ago, and I'm INFP. In other words, my personality, my identity is 180 degrees different than it was 20 years ago. Now, according to Myers-Briggs, that's impossible. According to psychology, that's impossible. That would mean I'm schizophrenic, according to psychology. Now, maybe I am schizophrenic, and maybe some people think that that's genuinely true, but personally, I don't. And I know other people who've changed their identity. I mean, if you look at your identity, it's not the same today as it was 20 years ago. It's not the same today as it was when you were 7. So your identity is constantly changing. But the psychological models, the outer game, don't really look at that. And that's why, for me, this is insufficient. You have to have the inner game as well, because the inner game is the animating force. Or another way of saying it is, if you've ever seen a dead person, you've seen a dead person, you'll know there's something missing. It's a body, but the spirit's gone. The spirit's left the body. It's not the person you know. So what is that animating spirit? We're not just the body. We're not just the identity. So first step, purpose. Second step, identity. Understand what your strengths are. By understanding what your strengths are, you can then understand how you collaborate with other people. And the perfect balanced team has a combination of all of these different 4 profiles. Third step, then understand what is stopping the flow of energy from the inner to the outer. Because if you want to generate wealth, you want to address a health challenge, you want to create a company, you want to create a masterpiece, you want to change climate change or inequality, any of those things, doesn't matter what you're trying to do, you need the inner and the outer. You need both of these working in tandem. And we've known this duality, whether you call it the inner game or the outer game, or the unconscious and the conscious, the personality and the essence, the soul and the ego, it really doesn't matter. These are just terms which different wisdom cultures have used. We've known this for 5,000 years. So why don't we do this? Why is the world in such a state? Well, the reason is that what sits in between these two is our belief system, our mindset. So the third step is understanding that we are not this, we're not our outer game. And what I talked about last time is the 4 elements, the 4 inventions which were invented in Sumer: money, measurement of time, slavery, and marriage, which have created myths. The myth that it's hard work to make money, the myth that love is outside us, the myth that we're constantly running out of time, or the myth that there will always be people who are more creative or more intelligent or whatever, and that I don't have that capability in myself. And there are many, many other myths, but those are the four main myths I would pick out. And so what the third step is to help the individual to change their relationship to the element which sits behind that, which is money, time, power, and love. And if you can change your relationship to those four things, so you extract yourself from the man-made system and reconnect to the entire ecosystem, and the fourth step becomes inevitable, which is creating a masterpiece. So what I do is I guide people, individuals, through that journey. Purpose, artist profile, extracting yourself from the system by changing your beliefs, or reclaiming your relationship to the entire ecosystem, perhaps be a better way of putting it, so that you create your masterpiece. And then the masterpiece component consists of articulating what is it, what's the promise you're making, or what we call the value proposition, what value are you creating, who are you creating that value for, how does the communications flow work, how does the money flow work, and then helping you to launch that. And so that's the journey of an individual, and there are individual programs to do that, there are group programs to do that, and then there's the collective or company version of that. And the company version is relatively, I mean, same principle. It starts off with articulating everyone's personal purpose, but mainly what I would refer to as the source. And I can explain what I mean by source in a minute. So you work with one individual, then you work with the board, or you work with the team, everyone's personal purpose. Then you work out where everyone is mapped on the artist profile. Then you help them to change their belief system, and then you create the collective masterpiece. And what I also do is help them to create their collective mission. And their mission is what's the next chapter of their collective lives, and that is different. So you'll see that I position the mission in the outer game, and I position the purpose in the inner game. Why? Because purpose is outside of space and time, whereas mission is inside space and time. So for instance, my purpose is free the world's creativity for good. That's an existential thing, whereas a mission would be something like put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. It's a very, very clear mission. It's got a time related to it. It's a goal. It's clear that you can achieve that or you can't achieve that. But free the world's creativity for good, you can't define when that has happened. I could say it's happened because I freed it myself, but that's a subjective experience. So those are the four steps. And what I do with companies is I then take them on that journey and then guide them to create the collective masterpiece. And there are a number of companies who've gone through that process. I mean, one of them's HP. HP, the technology company, printers and computers, laptops. They're actually the founder of Silicon Valley. They were founded in 1939 by two visionaries, Hewlett and Packard. And I worked with their head of chief sustainability officer 3 years ago. Did this whole process with his team, and they then went and implemented it. So I actually did a 2-day workshop, took them up into Silicon Valley, went up to the hills, created a collective painting to embody this mission they were bringing to life, helped them to identify the masterpieces they were going to create. They then went off and did it, and 3 years later, Newsweek, which is a relatively respected magazine in the US, recognized them as the most responsible company in North America. And that was the plan we actually put into place. So we developed a 3-year plan, and they implemented the 3-year plan, and it literally changed the entire company. And because they're the founder of Silicon Valley, so you could say the source of Silicon Valley, that will then have ripple effect across Silicon Valley.
I find that it's fantastic, I suppose. It's trying to, how well do people generally sort of fall into their mode? So when you excuse me, if you're trying to sort of unwrap their purpose, you know, because I mean, at leadership level, you're not dealing with a lot of sort of alpha ego energy as well.
Not the people who are attracted to this program.
Okay.
No alphas will be attracted to this program, because they won't. and if they are, then I won't accept them.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So leadership wise, it's funny because you were saying, you know, doing, and I'm just circling back in terms of you were talking about the I think it's Myers-Briggs or the, you know, the wealth dynamics, how you could do the profile and you come up with one thing today, but you do another profile and you come up with a different thing tomorrow. And it's,
Correct.
you know, it's you know, it's your psychotic self meeting yourself, or else it's, but I'm kind of going, you take the same 6 hours and take that painting and go to the same location tomorrow and you'll come out with a different painting, right?
Correct. Absolutely different.
It's
Totally different.
So it's the same thing essentially. It's a different profile set. It's a different everything.
Absolutely. And herein lies the difference between a masterpiece and your purpose.
Mm.
So your purpose doesn't change.
Mm.
If your purpose is consistent throughout your life, it's the red thread, it's the fil rouge in French of your life, right? So it's eternal. It's possible for it to change, but you basically have to reset your entire cellular system in order to, and I use this word intentionally, be reborn inside the same body.
Mm.
And I haven't come up with a better term for it. And I use it knowing that some people go, reborn. Oh my God, that's something to do with like a whole cult system. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about resetting your body at a fundamental cellular level. So you're detoxing the body to such an extent that you take a leap in your energy. Metaphysically, your energy leaps, and therefore your personality will shift as well. And that's totally possible. In fact, the majority of people who go through the programs go through that process. They become who they are by releasing the toxins that stop them from being who they are. And actually, that's what changes their world. And actually, that's the simplest way to change the world. So it's a whole kind of other conversation, but in a nutshell, you don't change the world by changing other people. You don't change the world by what you do. You change the world by who you become. And you do that by elevating your energy. So and by following your purpose so that everything aligns with your purpose. But as you say, your identity, that's constantly evolving, constantly changing. In fact, if you come back to wealth dynamics, if you're familiar with it, wealth dynamics is predicated on the idea that there are 8 different entrepreneurial profiles. Everyone from the Oprah Winfrey profile to the Mark Zuckerberg profile to the George Soros profile, to the Steve Jobs, Shell Sanders, whatever, right? So there are all these different 8 profiles, and they're all mapped on this square. Well, if you look at the founder, the creator of that system, Roger James Hamilton, with who I trained for one, I became one of 10 master trainers in his network of 2.5 million people. He says, you are one. You're a creator. You're a supporter. You're a mechanic. You're a lord. You're a trader, whatever, right? And you're fundamentally this. But if you look at him, he accesses all of those energies. He may be a creator, but he can step into every single energy. In fact, I sat next to him having dinner with him in Japan, and he explained that in his workshops, he intentionally moves around the cycle. So he's accessing all of those energies. Now, he may have a home energy, but he's accessing all of those energies. Well, if you look at the greatest artists, they did the same thing. So Michelangelo, he was an incredible creator, but he was also, again, that according to wealth dynamics, is what he calls dynamo energy, the starter energy. Then I actually map it around the season. So I go spring, I map it around a tree. Spring is when you grow. right? And the tree grows. And then you have summer, which is when the flowers blossom, which is what he calls blaze energy. Well, Michelangelo also did that because he worked with 8 popes in the Medici family. So the most powerful people in the world at that time, 8 popes, 8 popes. And I lived to 87, right? So he's able to do that blaze energy as well. He's able to connect to people, but he's also able to create wealth, which, according to wealth dynamics, is the tempo energy. How do we know that? Because when he died, he had 2,000 gold florins sitting in his bedroom in a case. He had houses in Florence and houses in Rome. So he invested in property. He was a multi-millionaire when he died. Multi-millionaire when he died. And then the final one, steel energy. Well, that's what I call the choreographer. And the choreographer is about coordinating and choreographing other people to do things. And I know he was able to do that because he was taking literally slabs of rock out of a mountainside, which would require 60 people to move that rock. And he oversaw it. He didn't have a foreman. I mean, he probably had a foreman, but he was there because he knew if there was a single crack in that rock, in that marble, the whole thing was screwed. And then after he's created the pieces, after he's created David, he's moving David, which is, more than human size. It's a godlike figure. And he's moving it across the main squares in Florence. Now, as an artist, like you're like, don't damage the painting, right? This is easy to move, right? Like you saw, it's easy to move. But a statue made of marble? Are you kidding me? So he's choreographing all these people to make sure there's not a single crack in that stone as it's being moved. Now that means he must have stepped into that energy. But then you can look at artists who didn't do that. So you take Van Gogh. Well, Van Gogh, incredible creator, 60 paintings in 60 days. Was he collaborating? No. No. He sold only 2 paintings in his lifetime, and both of those were to his brother. Was he making money? No, he died penniless. Was he able to choreograph people? He wasn't even able to choreograph himself. And when Paul Gauguin came to stay with him in the Yellow House, he left after 6 weeks, the same day that Van Gogh, or the day after Van Gogh cut his ear off. So you can see different, tap into different, you can see different artists tap into different energy. So it's possible to tap into all of it. And true mastery is actually expanding to become all of it if you want your masterpiece to be seen as a masterpiece in your lifetime, to be recognized, to be valued, so that you can live from your masterpiece. Otherwise, you have to die, and then somebody else will recognize it as a masterpiece or not.
Do you get a dilution then at that point?
How do you mean dilution of?
Well, I suppose, I mean, you take it sort of dying penniless is almost what had to be done. Do you know what I mean? Or to take away the distraction of selling, or the distraction of, marketing and being sort of tainted by incoming energy of people's expressions and all the rest,
I think that's very accurate. I would say that there is a gestation period between the act of creation and the act of reception. So the act of creation is bringing from the metaphysical into the physical, creating in canvas. But then there is the receipt of the value, or the recognition of the value coming back. So creation, recognition. Now, if of recognition, painting's been created, it's sitting on the canvas, you then pollute, as you call it, the sales process. I would actually use a different term, the process of making people aware that this exists, communication process. If in that process you are trying to grab the money, like you're addicted to money, or you inadvertently push money away. There are 2 things: addiction to money and aversion to money.
It's not my work. This comes from Peter Koenig. So if you have aversion to money, Van Gogh had some kind of aversion to money. It wasn't addiction to money. It was some kind of aversion to money because he unintentionally is constantly sabotaging himself. So if in that process you have that energy, in other words, that kind of level of pollution, if you like, which is limiting you to only be part of the system, what's happening is as soon as you go into that conversation, the other person can unconsciously feel that when they run a million miles. They know you're trying to sell. They feel it. And they immediately feel your aversion. And so they're pushed away even further. So you're absolutely right that this gestation period between the act of creation and the act of recognition can extend. Now, in a child, where we talk about the gestation period, so conception of the not even the moral, it's like the conception, the egg is fertilized. At that point of fertilization, that conception, we know from that moment to the moment that the child is born is what, 9.5 months. You have children, I have children. We've both been through it, right? In our bodies, but we've experienced it with our partners. So that period, we know that that lasts for a certain amount of time. But what appears to happen with a creation like a painting or a masterpiece is that if there is some form of pollution, whether it be relationship to money or relationship to power or relationship to time or relationship to love, in other words, we're doing it to be recognized, or we're trying to make the money quickly, or we're trying to exert power over somebody else, the other feels that, and this gestation period extends and extends and extends and extends, and it can extend infinitely until the moment at which you die. And so I think you're very accurate to say that Van Gogh had to die in order for that energy, which was blocking the natural flow of this painting being recognized as a masterpiece, in order for it to be recognized. So literally he had to remove the energy which was trapped in the ego, in the conscious mind, in the personal unconscious, in the body, that had to literally be released through the act of death so that people could genuinely feel that energy and then be attracted to it without the barrier, the self-sabotage of that individual's personality stopping it.
It makes a lot of sense. Just a couple of things there. I mean, you talked about, so when working in the corporate world and with the likes of HP or whatever, where you're creating a 3-year vision. I mean, is the masterpiece created at the time of the workshop, and it just takes that duration of time to become recognizable? Is maybe
it's a really good question. I'll give you another example. So working with a luxury goods company in Paris, relatively well-known brand, and I ran the workshop with the CEO and his team just after lockdown finished in France. So it was about May, I think. Yeah, early May, and I helped everyone to articulate their purpose. I helped them to create their collective mission. And then we started to look at the masterpiece. And I introduced a model which explains the 4 different types of masterpiece you can create. And I mapped it out and gave a whole load of examples. And I then ran an exercise with the 10 people in the room. And it's really interesting because the 10 people, like, they were coming up with ideas, and we had them all mapped out on the board and like on this grid of the 4 different types of masterpieces. And I could really feel the creative energy like flowing. I was like, yes, this is working. And the CEO was still sitting at the table, and he refused to join any of the 3 groups in the room. I was like, what's going on here? And he's sitting right next to me, and I could feel this energy. I was like, oh, he's not involved. And then I stopped them. I said, go and take a break. And he grabbed me and said, I need to talk to you. I was like, oh, okay. And he pulled me behind the screen. Like there was a big screen in the room, and he pulled me behind the screen and he sat down and he goes, right, this is what I see. And he literally mapped out the masterpiece and went, we start here, we do this, then we do this, then we do this, then we do this. And you can feel that energy, right? I mean, literally, as I was running through the model he was creating, that was the act of creation. You can feel the energy of the act of creation, even though you weren't in that moment. Begs the question, then of course, what's the memory and what's creation, right? Back to the beginning of the conversation. But he mapped it out, he saw it, and he created the whole thing. And I was blown away. And he goes, what do you think? And I was in tears. I was like, wow, I didn't expect you to do this. And I said to him, right, you need to present this now. You need to present this to your team. He's like, I haven't thought it through. I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter you haven't thought it through. What matters is that they feel the same energy that I've just felt. Because if they see where you're going, they're going to be totally inspired. And if they don't see where you're going, and it depends on me, then I'm still holding the connection. I don't want to hold the connection. That means you're addicted to me. So he stood up and he shared what he was trying to do. And he got a round of applause. How often does a CEO get a round of applause in a workshop from his team? It's really, really rare. And everything shifted from that moment. Now, did he know what the final piece was? In answer to a question, no. But he knew the area that he needed to operate in. He knew where it fitted. Now, not everyone is that visionary. And that's why the individual program we run is 4 days plus 10 weeks. And then what we've added on is an alumni program, the first 3 months of which are included actually in the 10-week program. And that alumni program is you come and you ask your questions. So effectively what you've got is a 6-month program. Now in that 6 months, we will help you from wherever you are to the point where you've articulated and worked out what your masterpiece is, even if you haven't brought it to life. And then you get to stay in the alumni program. If you want to continue in the alumni program, we will help you, because this journey of expansion is not a moment in time. It's infinite. It goes on and on and on and on and on in all directions. So some people, like the CEO in Paris, like that, sees it. I'd coached him already for 18 months. He'd worked with other people, other coaches. I wasn't even his primary coach, but he got the purpose. He got what I was trying to do. He then brought me in to help his team, elevated his team, got his team to the point where his team were excited, and he's literally just written. He sent me an article on Monday explaining what they're doing, and it's this long article. You'd love it, Pete, because you like in-depth things. It was really like detailed. This is what we're doing, and it was basically everything we mapped out in the workshop. And I just read it, and it's a massive smile on my face, because not only will this impact the world of luxury goods, like his world, the world of fashion, but it's also going to send ripples out into the luxury goods world. And what it demonstrates is the power that one person has to literally flip the entire system. So different people, different stages. Some people, they'll get it immediately because they've done their work. They've basically changed their relationship to money, time, power, and love. Some people, they're at the beginning of that journey. They're keen, they want to go on the journey, and therefore we just need to do more reclamation work, reclaiming their relationship to these things. So then it emerges. But it doesn't really matter where you are on the journey. What matters is that you choose to go on the journey, and you don't do what most of us do, which is we go on a retreat or we do a coaching program and we connect and we get into a moment of flow, and then afterwards we contract. So then we go, oh, that was amazing. Right, I need to go on another one. Connect, contract. And most of us do this most of the time. And I've done it. That's how I know about it. But my belief is that that's not what the world needs right now. What the world needs is tools which allow us to constantly expand. And that's where Peter Koenig's tool comes in, which we've incorporated fully into our masterpiece program, because it just allows you to have a very simple tool which allows you to constantly expand. And really, at one level, what the program is is enabling that you can do it yourself. And if you can do it yourself, as I said throughout this episode and the last episode, it is inevitable that you'll create your masterpiece. Because if you're creating all the time and you keep on connecting to the system, then you have to create a masterpiece. The only question then is, what is that going to be? But that actually that takes care of itself. It's like, it becomes so obvious, as it was to the CEO. It was like, I know what I'm doing. That's it.
You mentioned you picked up almost a bad energy off him. I can't remember the exact wording, but you're sort of saying you're sitting beside him, and I mean, post obviously what happened. Do you understand the energy?
He was in flow. What was happening was I was projecting my own fears onto him.
Okay.
The fear of rejection, the fear of not being accepted. Right. So wanting him to get it, and I was just projecting stuff onto him. But he was literally channeling. He was channeling the founder of this organization. He was connecting up to that, and he was just in a really focused state. And therein lies, the secret of reclamation work is what we end up doing is we end up projecting our unresolved stuff onto another person, onto another thing. So in this case, I was projecting the fear of rejection onto the CEO. You could have had an experience when you were young which led you to be insecure around money. And what you do is you then project that insecurity onto money. So money is a form of security, but without money, I feel insecure. All money is a piece of paper, right? This is a 100 franc. No, that's $100. That's more than $100 because the dollar's collapsing. But it's about $90 these days. But it used to be $100. So that's $90. It's just a note, right? What we associate with that note is all of our projections, which we project onto that note. We go, oh, that's going to give me peace, or if I'm really wealthy, it will bring me love. And so we don't see it as a note. We don't see it as just something. We see it as it's intrinsically wrapped up with our emotions. And we do exactly the same with a partner. A partner is about bringing us love. Without a partner, we can't have love. Or without the resources, we can't create a masterpiece. We project onto something, someone. Or I can't do it because my boss says I can't do it. Or I can't do it because my wife says I can't do it. Or my husband says I can't do it. But if you look at money, that's just $90, 100 francs.
I'm intrigued. When you talk about your masterpiece, it's always singular. Is there only ever one?
No. There's only really one at any one time. Okay. I think. Go back to Michelangelo. One purpose. We can speculate what that purpose was, but multiple masterpieces. David, Sistine Chapel, blah 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 blah. Van Gogh, one purpose, 60 paintings in 60 days. Each of them sells for more than $10 million. No, you have multiple masterpieces. The problem is that most of us are trying to do too many things at the same time, which is why I encourage these at a time. And then don't even call it a masterpiece. Because as soon as you do that, you may block yourself. You put yourself under too much pressure. So in fact, you do the very opposite. Go back to painting the painting. You literally just focus on the brushstroke. and then allow others to recognize you and recognize it. Recognize you as a master and recognize it as a masterpiece.
It's coming across. I mean, is it?
I mean, go on.
I was going to say, I don't know if I've necessarily got this right, but I mean, you know, in sort of different worlds, you talk about away from energy and toward energy, or away from intention and toward attention. So what I'm sort of getting is almost from a painter's perspective, it's always away from, in terms of you strip out all the, well, what are you trying to get away from? Well, it's either neutral or it's done by the starvation of other, so starvation of money or the sort of desire for wealth or anything else. So if it's an away from, in terms of I just need to create this, and it's away. Whereas if you go toward, is different. Have I got this right? I don't know.
Neither. If these are the two, this is the dictional reversion. So if you are being pulled towards something, like towards making money, towards that addiction, if you're pushing away from, oh, that's aversion. Actually, the act of creation is neither. The act of creation is holding the tension of these opposing forces. And in that silence, allowing creation to emerge, acknowledging they're there, accepting they're there, not trying to change them, not trying to do anything with them, but in that moment, finding a moment of stillness. It's the silence between the notes. It's that space, the Japanese term ma, which is just literally space. It's the space between the brushstroke. And if you look at Starry Night by Van Gogh, right, the one with the swirls, right? So one is he actually saw that energy. So when you change your brain waves, you actually start to see the energies flowing. That isn't the point I wanted to make. The real point I wanted to make is if you go and stand and look at that canvas, it's currently in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, you'll see that there's actually bare parts of the canvas. He didn't even treat the canvas. Right? He didn't even put a wash over the canvas. It's bare canvas. So, and yet them to breathe. It's that space which enables it to breathe. It's in the gap between that true creation happens. These ideas which I'm sharing and which you're interacting with and asking questions, brilliant questions, and then holding the space. It's neither happening in here, nor is it happening in your head, nor is it happening in the observer's head. It's happening in the space in between all of us. And what you do brilliantly, as I've told you off air, is you hold that. You hold these opposing forces. Most of us try and fill the silence. We're uncomfortable with this because we think we have to fill. And yet that's where creation happens, in that space. And we live in a world of mobile phones and social media and fast cars and Netflix and sugar and food and whatever, right? All distractions, going back to your earlier point. They all distract us from this, holding this space. podcast. I haven't obviously sat in on another show, but what you do with me, and I presume therefore what you do with others, is you hold that. In other words, it's not going towards something or away from something. It's knowing that those forces are there and then just going to that space of nothingness where everything is. Now, you may then ask the question, okay, well, how does that fit with, for me, when I'm at 25th, that I can ski with my grandchildren. Isn't that too something? Isn't that a paradox that I'm moving towards that? Well, no, because that would presume that time is linear and we live in a Newtonian world where I do this and 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 this to get there. And I may describe it that way so your conscious mind can understand it. But you know as well as I do that it's not a logical set of sequences. It's a leap in energy that will be reflected in the world outside, which is not a Newtonian logical conversation, it's a metaphysical Einsteinian conversation. And so even though I may explain it logically, and I've now spent, the best part of 3 hours with you in the last 10 days, close on 4 hours, logically explaining all of these things. I hope you're beginning to realize that everything I've said means nothing. All that matters is how I said it. Because actually, and I don't say I've done a perfect job, I've done far from a perfect job. How I've said it that is really important. I've made it as logical as possible so your mind can follow the conversation. It's about what you feel right now. That potential. That's it. And connecting to that as often as you can.
The power is in the space.
Power is in the space.
I've never felt it or seen it as profoundly as I have at this moment.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Now you can feel it really powerfully running through you. And you see, you feel that there's emotion there, right? So those tears are the pollution that sits inside you that stops you from connecting to all of this.
Is that the same as the inner voice, the inner silence? Is it the same or is it different when you mix two chemistry, two souls?
So what's really interesting, and I know you have a role to play, is this is what you do in life, by the way. You felt that energy and you immediately went into a logical question to avoid the emotion. And when I pull you back, you feel the emotion again. And I'm not picking on you, I'm doing it so that you can feel it and so you can experience it. And so everyone watching this can feel it and experience it. You can feel that emotion because this is what we do in life. We go up into our head and we avoid things. And it's not about, we will avoid that because fuck, that's scary. And the only reason I can tell you that's going on is because I feel the same. I feel the same. You can see it in my eyes. I can feel the same emotion that you're going through, which of course destroys this whole Newtonian motion idea that I have to be in the same room as you. I'm feeling it in the same moment as you. How is that possible? You're 1,000 miles away from me. What? And if I hold you here, you feel it. So yeah, I can answer the question, but it misses the point. We just end up going back into a logical Newtonian conversation. But here's the real kicker. What's happening right now, Pete, is I am providing the connection to you. I'm making that connection for you. I'm saying it as a consequence of what I'm doing. I don't want that to happen. That means you become addicted to me. You keep on having to call me up every time and say, let's have another call. What I want to do is give you the cable. I want you to have this. And this is what Peter did to me, gave me the cable. And he said, give this to as many people as possible. Has this. You get to feel it all the time. If everyone in your audience has this, everyone watching, it will change everything. So I know I didn't answer your question this time around, but it was with love.
And that's right.
So it is.
Hmm. This has cleared my sheet. It just, it's like clearing the canvases, going, yeah, let's go.
Yeah. Well, we started off by talking about a blank canvas. I mean, that was your first question, which was a brilliant question. And here we are with a blank canvas, and I want to give you this, right?
Thank you.
Because that is the access, right? I mean, I haven't described how the reclamation tool works, but you felt it. You felt that connection. That's what I do to answer an earlier question.
Hmm.
I help people to do that, because every artist up until now has always done the opposite. They've always plugged you in via their masterpiece. No artist has given you the cable and said, here you go. They've plugged you in via their masterpiece. But we're at a point in the history of humanity where that's not enough anymore. It's not sufficient. We don't have enough time. Your children don't have enough time. My children don't have enough time. It can't be about me sticking a painting on the wall and saying, I'm amazing, and look at my canvas because this is brilliant. I'd like to. My ego would love to do that. But my soul says, no, take the cable. Please.
But I mean, not. I mean, not that, everything else just naturally follows. It's almost, there is no competition. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? By you don't. Everything balances anyway. So even by providing those connections, it doesn't take away from your masterpiece or the next person's masterpiece.
No.
In fact, collectively, it strengthens.
Absolutely. It's like a forest.
Mm.
And what we're doing at the moment is, rather than growing a forest, we're growing our own tree. Is my tree growing the fastest? I need to fuel my tree. Give me some water. Oh, fuck you, because I've got some water, and I've got the best water, and I've got the best minerals, and I've worked out how to differentiate my tree from your tree. So my tree is going to grow the highest. No, no, I'm the king of the castle. What the? No. Do you know what happens in a forest? All trees photosynthesize at the same speed. What? What does that mean? It means that trees are sharing the minerals and the waters between them because they know that the canopy creates a microclimate underneath that helps them to store more water and more minerals. So if there is a consistent canopy, and if you have a big enough canopy, like a rainforest, it induces rain, so they all benefit. So trees in an ecosystem, in a forest, don't go, I don't know. They don't do that. They don't try and grow their tree the fastest. They try and grow all the trees at the same time. What does that mean? It means that we need to master and focus on what we're really, 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 really good at. In other words, what we absolutely love. And that will go across all trees in the forest. So rather than focus on just your own masterpiece, I mean, I have a masterpiece, right? It's called the Masterpiece Program. But within that program, what am I world class at? What am I really, really love? I love helping people to articulate their purpose and articulate their masterpiece. So what do I do with other people's masterpieces? I help them to articulate their purpose and articulate their masterpiece. And I help them with their mission. But am I the best person to do money? I can do it. I'm pretty good at it. But Peter's better. He sourced it. What about power? Well, JP, Jean-Philippe, he's better at that than me. So let's get him and do it. What about masterpieces? I know Carrie, founder of United Cities, she's better at working out whether that's your masterpiece than I am. So I'm bringing in all these people who are really, really good at all these things. And that's how we're going to build this forest, by having people like focus on what they absolutely, absolutely love.
I mean, that allows the clarity of vision. You know, that it's almost a bit like you were saying with the painting. You know, you're at arm's length or brush distance length at the same time, which in itself is useful. You know, that having people around you too allows you not to necessarily be on the canvas. You know, it's like you get to take perspective. You know, so
yeah, so it's a totally different way of thinking about creation. The historic was a Michelangelo creating a canvas, because the level of consciousness, to use a word used at the beginning, the level of awareness, the level of connectedness, the level of collaboration on the planet wasn't ready for what we're talking about now. But there is also something else which is missing in this conversation, which is the idea of source. And again, this is not my work, this is Peter's work. And so what often happens when we really talk about the forest is we forget the tree, and we forget that we have our own roots. And maybe that's the starting point for an entirely another conversation, if you're open to it. You know, what is the balance between the roots of the tree and the forest? Your tree will fall over, and therefore you leave a hole in the canopy. And so your responsibility as a source is to make sure that your roots are the deepest, so that all trees benefit. But you have to focus on your own roots and then focus on what you love, and that's a balance. So maybe that's a whole other conversation that you and I can kick off.
I need to go and sit in a dark room.
Hopefully with a blank canvas.
With a blank canvas. Hey, turn off the lights and God knows what will be produced. My masterpiece.
There you are, Pete.
Alexander, it's been awesome. Thank you. And no doubt we will speak again.
Yeah, we will, with great pleasure. Thank you for holding the space. Love these sessions and look forward to the next one.
Thank you. Take care.
Will do.